Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Hard Sell. I am your host, Joel Stevenson. And one of the things that we try to do on The Hard Sell is we try to bring people from all different sorts of industries. I think it's interesting to understand, what's similar and what's different about selling into, the various different industries that are out there and the different types of buying personas and buying processes. I think that there's a lot to learn from those today. And we've got a great guest today. Will Anderson is on the show for the first time. I've actually known Will for a little while as a customer of Yesware, but he is a sales leader at Law 360. Law 360 is part of LexisNexis, and I'll let him explain a little bit more about what they do. But Will's been sort of worked his way up in sales and has been a leader across a number of different roles, mostly now focused on sort of the retention or what we sometimes refer to as customer success. And it's great to have you on the show, Will.
Thank you, Joel. It's been a pleasure to be here. I got to say, this is my first entry into the podcast space. So I'm really excited to be here. And
Well, it'll be sort of like the blind leading the blind then. So you're in good company. Well, maybe just start by telling us a little bit about Law 360 for folks that may not be familiar with what Law 360 does, and then maybe just tell us a little bit more about what your team does there.
Sure. So Law 360 is a subscription-based legal news service, which is operated by Portfolio Media. That's kind of what we're known as. But I mean, most folks know us as being associated with LexisNexis because we are a subsidiary of the greater LexisNexis. And basically what we do is we deliver newsletters to more than 2 million readers daily. We have over 60 different news sections, so varying areas of coverage, practice areas such as intellectual property, sports and betting. So we're all over the map, and we're pretty. We have we cast a wide net within the legal industry and keeping everyone up to date from a news perspective. Customers love us and we love them. So definitely have enjoyed the run that I've had with them for nearly the past 8 years. First starting within the renewal account management space, still there, started as a rep and gradually grew and shifted into the management space back in 2018. So it's definitely been a really interesting run because I've never, I don't have a law background. And when I first started the job, I was a little nervous about that, having to have conversations with attorneys and just the concept of that. But I embraced the role and I really got to know a lot of these attorneys over the years, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of interesting conversations, and I really admire the work that they do. So it's really helpful to really get a good understanding. It's not all the glitz and glamour that you see on TV. A lot of it is a lot of hard work, trying times, and it's helpful to be able to provide a service that allows them to navigate, their roles and help them do their jobs even better.
Talk a little bit more about the service. I guess my question is, are the newsletters that you're providing largely, is the audience the attorneys themselves, or is the audience their customers?
The audience would be the attorneys themselves. And ultimately, so it's a legal news wire. So essentially we have an editorial team of well over 200 staff members. I believe now it's about 250 staff members. And they're out there, they're in the courthouses, they're interviewing attorneys, they're on the grounds collecting this information, writing up the content, and actually then we're curating it and putting it out daily. So then the receivers of these of the daily newsletters and just the articles that come out every day would be the attorneys. They're able to access it pretty much on any mobile device or desktop, and it keeps them informed. So then by them being informed on what's going on day to day within their respective practice area, this allows them to be better informed for their clients.
This is sort of like trying to keep up with the latest in case laws as that sort of, develops.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, maybe talk a little bit about I'm curious about, as you build a team to work in this environment, my guess is that your interview ranks are not overflowing with people with legal backgrounds necessarily. And so I'm curious a little bit about, how do you kind of find people that are going to be a good fit for what you do? And then as you're going through the interview process, like what sort of qualities, or what are the, intangibles, or what skills that you're trying to vet for?
Well, you brought up a good point, because I mean, like I said earlier, I didn't have a background. So, and it's not to say that those who do have a legal background don't do well as well. I mean, it definitely serves them particularly well because they can actually speak the language of the customers directly. But oftentimes, I find that the most successful reps that I've hired do not have a legal background at all. So they're coming into it pretty raw with whatever skill set they have, whatever they're bringing to the table. And typically what I have found, that's usually that what I typically look for is someone who has the ability to be a good conversationalist. And you kind of note that initially on the initial call, like the manager screen that you have. So good conversationalist / good listener, has a history of success in whatever previous sales role that they may have been in. Organized for sure, because given the volume of renewal and just accounts that we have to manage, just because I'm housed within the renewal account management space. So on average, rep on my team would be managing upwards of 300 plus accounts. So that takes a lot of organization involvement, process driven for sure, and disciplined to kind of applying that process and staying organized.
And if for the book, I'm just curious, for the books at 300, does it tend to be sort of uniform account sizes, or can it vary quite a bit?
They definitely vary. So within Law 360, there's kind of three big segments, right? For our subscription service. So the main segments would be small law. So that's servicing firms sized from solo practitioners all the way up to about 49, 50 attorneys. Mm-hmm. Then you'd have large law that's going, 50 and above. So those big name firms that you hear about on the news. So those are the larger firms. And then corporate would be kind of more the in-house counsel for a lot of major, Fortune 500 companies. And so they're those three different sales segments, all servicing kind of from the same subscription-based service. And so within the small law segment, which I've been housed in for the past nearly 8 years, it varies in size. So you could be doing processing or conducting a renewal for a solo practitioner, small law attorney, and that in itself has its own experience versus a firm that's a little higher up on the scale, maybe in the upper 25 to 30 to 40 range, where the experience is different. You might be dealing with probably someone in more on the admin side, versus when you get smaller, get a little lower down the scale, they probably don't have the resources to allocate to just an admin. So you're probably going to be dealing with the decision maker directly themselves, who happens to also be an attorney and end user. So it gives the reps the ability to really be as versatile as possible and adapt.
Yeah, and so I imagine you made a little bit of reference to this earlier in your intro. You've probably got to find somebody that for those that don't have a law degree or law exposure, which sounds like is a decent part of your hiring funnel, somebody that's sort of willing to be brave enough to face off against what I think for a lot of people, the law is kind of scary, and there's a sort of thing like, oh, this person is an attorney, I'm not an attorney.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a very intimidating, like I know during the interview process, especially, that's one of the first things that they usually ask is like, I don't have a law degree. They're kind of hesitant, and I just give them the first thing I usually do in my interview process is I give them a little background on myself, and I more humanize the role and just say, look, you can be successful here. You don't have to have a JD to be successful here. You just have to be able to be a strong salesperson, someone who I kind of use the approach of like the humble hustle mentality, right? We're selling a service and we're dealing with people. And if you take those people outside of their roles, don't just look at the role, because the role will intimidate you, right? Look at the individual behind the role, and then it kind of makes it a little easier to navigate. You're just talking to a person who's ultimately looking to continue on our service or acquire our service to help them get better.
Yeah, it's interesting. And what are you guys, are you these days, are you where is your sales team physically seated? Are you back in the office or remote, or how are you guys set up?
Well, my team is pretty much scattered about right now. So in pre-pandemic, obviously everyone was in the office. We're based out of New York, and post, we've essentially undergone quite a bit of changes. Obviously, for the folks that I had on my team, they kind of decided to make some decisions and shift things around. I think a lot of people did that. So I have folks that are scattered all around the country, including some folks that are actually housed within the Philippines as well. So that was kind of an internal decision to, just because I had a couple of gaps in hiring. I had some opens, and but obviously, given the uncertainty of those times, we couldn't really hire. We had to put things on hold for a bit, naturally, as a lot of companies did.
Yeah.
But so I had this gap that I myself had to kind of get in there and get my hands dirty and just kind of work with this open territory until I could find a solution. But thankfully, we were able to help other parts of the greater organization, the LexisNexis organization, by taking on some folks that were housed in the Philippines that were actually doing a completely different job, working for a completely different company. They were working more in the meeting space. So obviously during that time, if you're not having meetings, then you just have folks sitting idle. So by being able to take on a couple of those folks, train them up, get them situated on our end, and train them like they would be any rep here at the company, we were able to see great success for that and actually expand it. We started with one in the fall of 2020 and kind of grew it over time, where now I have about 5 folks from the Philippines that are, massive contributors to the team.
That's exciting. What, maybe talk to me a little bit about, so you went from a largely in-person New York, I think that's a sort of, I think also like Manhattan is like, it sort of has a particular type of sales culture from what I've seen. And so now not only a mostly or fully remote process, but also now a international remote team. That, like, how do you kind of keep the team focused and performing well? Like, what are some of the things that you have to do differently to kind of create some of that same culture you maybe had when you were back in the office?
Well, it's definitely challenging. I have found, here's the one thing that's interesting. I have found that because of the fact that we can have more meetings at a higher clip, because of the advent of all video conferencing, and because of the fact that in a physical location, you're limited to the space and the time in which you can occupy that space. Right. I can't count how many times pre-pandemic where I'll book a meeting room, book it for an hour. I'm having a conversation or a one-on-one with one of the team members. And maybe it might go a little long because we're really digging into their pipeline, or we're having some really good conversation about just sales strategies and whatnot. And all of a sudden you get a little knock on the window, and it's like, all right, time to go, because we got another sales team or another team in general needs to occupy that room. That's one of the pleasant surprises about the pandemic, kind of the circumstances that were created from the pandemic, is the fact that now with Zoom calls, you can be on as many and as long as you need to actually have those really core conversations and get to the heart of things. And I think that helps, having better conversations. I feel like I'm closer to my team now than I was pre-pandemic, and I've gotten to know them a lot better now. So I think during the course of our one-on-ones each week, we discuss various things. We talk about, strategies. We talk about, I firstly try to get to the heart of what's going on with them. So I'm always doing like kind of these check-ins with them at the start of any call. First and foremost, I also have like just kind of, I know one of the things is like having an open door policy. I don't have a door. So I just use that kind of approach. Like, and I've told that to every person that I've ever recruited and hired. It's like, I don't believe in an open door policy. I just have no door. Just come in. Let's go. Let's talk. Let's get to the heart of things, and let's understand, you have an issue, you have something going on, I'll get in the weeds with you and let's figure out how we can problem solve here. And, that builds trust. And through that trust, you start to build a culture and community, and have team meetings, and we'll just kind of keep things very casual and have conversations. I like to try to keep things light, because at the end of the day, what you bring to the table, your skill set, that's part of the reason why I hired you. So, I want to get to the heart of you as the person, because, I don't like looking at team members as just kind of these little metrics and cogs in a wheel. That doesn't promote that kind of culture. When you look at them as a person and then ultimately first, then everything else will kind of unfold in a very positive manner, because they feel that you care about them.
It's an interesting perspective, the notion about sort of getting meetings cut off, like as you're like when you're getting into it, like sort of cutting, that is quite an impersonal aspect of office life. We always had that at Wayfair, where we had, always, a jillion people and not nearly enough conference rooms for everybody to be in. That was our life, years and years ago. I remember, and like no meeting could ever start on time as well, because you always had to like the backup from the meetings before. And there has been a lot of talk. I think it was just Malcolm Gladwell, I think, just had an article in the Post, maybe sort of saying like, hey, like remote workers, like, what are you doing with your life? Like, is this really the life you want to live? Like, get back in the office. Like, and I think it's easy to remember the good parts of the office, being, in human contact with people, the water cooler stuff, going out for happy, like all of those types of things. But I think, sometimes we brush over like the impersonal aspects of it. And I think you bring up a good one about sort of these rituals that happen in the office that actually sort of somewhat depersonalize and actually make it more difficult to really get to, have a really, deep one-on-one, sort of unstructured, as long as it takes, type of conversation. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, aside from the commute, definitely don't necessarily miss that at all. Living in New York City, I actually like, I've gotten quite accustomed to working from home. So it actually has been really helpful. I have an 8-year-old son, and, being able to pick him up, drop him off at school, and just spend more time with him. That's definitely been an incredible treat for me over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think the whole remote work phenomenon has laid bare a bunch of things. One of which is that the way that we've managed maybe isn't good enough, in the sense that, some of these FaceTime and like that type of stuff, like it really doesn't, you're not really measuring outputs. You're measuring maybe an input, but it's kind of a crappy one. And, remote work, I think, has really forced us to try to reassess a lot of those management mechanisms, try to figure out like who's actually doing a good job and who's not doing a good job. And then a lot of people, I think, criticize this notion of community, and like, you're going to lose your community, you're going to lose your workers, like they won't care about your company anymore. Like, whatever. I mean, we haven't really found that here, but I sort of wonder if, the trade you get from, deeper connection to your other communities, whether it's your family or your town or, the other sort of things, that like if there isn't some compensation for that, because you're right, if you're like in your place like New York or here in Boston, and you're living in the suburbs or someplace that's anywhere not really close, like you were spending a lot of time commuting, and that has to take away from, other communities that you're trying to be a part of, I think.
Yeah. I mean, on average, I was spending about close to an hour each way commuting. And I'll never forget it, because I would have to pick up my son by 6 o'clock. So, I'd have to make sure now I'm clock watching.
Mhm.
right? So if you think about it, you get in, you start your day at like 8:30, 9 o'clock, and you're working and you're running through it. And then all of a sudden after lunch, you start to have to become more cognizant of the fact that, okay, it's 2 o'clock. Okay, it's 3 o'clock. And then by the time that 4 o'clock hour rings through, you're starting to, let's say you have a one-on-one or you're in a group meeting, right? Now you literally are kind of counting down. You're wondering, you're hoping someone doesn't show up late, or there's not a technical delay with the HDMI cord that's going to output the image on the big TV in the meeting room. So anything like that, because you know that ultimately you have to then jump out of there at 5 o'clock. So you can start making your way down to go pick up your son. So it's these little things that now have gone away. And also additionally, to your point, having these conversations and being able to be more connected to your personal community actually allows you that kind of work-life balance ultimately that so many of us talk to and really and speak about wanting so badly. You actually start to develop it, and then when you go into a work environment now, remote work environment, and you're having these conversations, you actually have more to talk about. You have more to share. I mean, the first thing that I usually have, when we first have our one-on-ones, or just me just start talking about asking them how their weekend went, what do they do, what's going on, and then they'll turn around and ask me, and then we kind of start vibing and conversing there. In the first like 15 minutes, 20 minutes of the one-on-one, usually it's just us kind of catching up on things and sharing insights about, you checked out that movie over the weekend, and I've seen that, or I want to see it. What did you think of the previous, the first version of it? It's just little things. So it builds that camaraderie that you probably wouldn't have the time to do in the office, because you're trudging through, you're getting there via your commute, and you might have some time to do a little bit of office cooler chat for maybe a small window of time till maybe the boss, you see the boss kind of walking around, and then you have to get back to your desk and do things. But this gives you the time to really build and forge those relationships when you're not in person. And I think it just makes for a better culture, better teams. Then when you do get together, at the times when you do have to get together, then it makes that bond even stronger, because now you know each other. You converse so many hours that now when you see each other, it's become old hat.
Right. Yeah. And I'm curious too about the international aspect of that, because I think Philippines is 14 or 16 hours ahead. It's a lot different. It's almost opposite to what we are, right?
Correct. So they do, we make some time adjustments there when we work with them. And but I found working with them immensely helpful. They've been really just open to just learning. And we've already talked about it numerous times. Like, either I'm going to go over there and try to convince my boss to send me over there for a week and just kind of really hang out with them. And I know they're dying to come over here and spend some time. So that's definitely in the works at some point, because we definitely want to be able to see each other in person, because we've spent so much time over the past 2 years getting to know each other. Know about their families, and one of the members of my team, like, his daughter just graduated from college. It's really cool to kind of get to know them at that level.
Yeah, that's neat. And what's worked? I mean, it sounds like, just sort of being a real human has been helpful. But what else has worked as you've, kind of brought that part of the team up to speed and gotten them sort of plugged into the way that you work, and, it sounds like they manage, sort of a full cycle of business. What have you sort of done to get them, kind of onboarded, and like what's worked versus maybe not worked?
So, a lot of what really works with regards to, what I find is just having some kind of a structure in the way that you lay things out. So when I first started Law 360 as a renewal account manager, it was still that portion of the team in terms of renewals for small law. It was still relatively young. There wasn't really a process. So I came in and I had some experience from my previous background. So I was able to start to post kind of onboarding and training. So I joined the organization back in December 2014. And we did some onboarding and training. But as you can imagine, part of that training was meeting people. But as you can imagine, it was December. Everybody's trying to hit goal. Yeah. They want to be nice, but they're like, who's this new guy? Mm-hmm. Hey, how's it going? We'll have a quick conversation, but I got to get back because I'm trying to hit quota. Totally understand. So after I was able to kind of get a lot of that initial dump of information on understanding the company, understanding the landscape and all that, we were able to go into a kind of a Christmas hiatus, and it allowed me to game plan and map out certain things in terms of how I wanted to look at things. So then I was able to go into January, like with my first quota carrying year, focused on what I needed to do in terms of managing this volume of accounts. I'd had experience with managing that volume of accounts previously, but obviously this is a different animal with regards to now these are timed, like contracted time limits, because ultimately everything runs off about a 12-month term for the subscription. So like I needed to create an operating window of maybe 60 days out and start that process. So a lot of the process that my team employs now is just from when I was a rep. They're benefiting from the fact that like a lot of the processes that I created when I was a rep that helped me be successful, I'm able to give to them. And I'm always evaluating. Even now as a manager, I'm always evaluating like what's going to work, what makes sense, what doesn't, trim the fat and just make it lean. One thing I got to say is, and you and I have had conversations about this. Yesware has been, crucial to that success, both for me as a rep and for my team now. Just because we have been able to incorporate that into the process with regards to how things are managed with renewals. I usually like to try to use a data-driven approach in conjunction with having that renewal window. So it's all kind of this very methodic, process-driven approach where you start reaching out to your renewals about 60 days ahead of time to gauge interest. And a lot of how that communication, that outbound communication, because given the volume, we're talking about 35 to 45 renewals a month, right? So it's a lot. And you can imagine trying to call 35 to 45 accounts every month, probably not going to get anywhere very fast. However, Yesware allows for a lot of the automation of that, right? To kind of just, you set that campaign up, you have your 45 or so accounts, and you start that outbound campaign of engaging interest. And now the responses are coming back, and now the rep can work from that standpoint in terms of responding based on those who respond back with engaging in interest and setting up calls and meetings. So it allows them to comfortably manage that kind of volume without feeling overwhelmed. And then from there, we can start to pace out, okay, managing a pipeline in a stage by day format. So breaking things down from like the early discussion portions, maybe in the beginning of the week, then transitioning to more the proposal follow-up portions, maybe towards the middle of the week, or proposal / maybe negotiation. So anything within their pipeline that they have in those particular stages, they kind of chop it up. Because oftentimes what I've found, and this is just kind of a process that I started to develop over the years and learning, and it's something that I discovered when I was a rep, rather than taking things on your pipeline in this monolithic pipeline in one foul swoop, and you can end up doing a whole day of that. When do you get to your emails? And then let's say you have meetings going on. So maybe you might not be able to get to everything in your pipeline, but being able to chop it up day by day allows, and tackling it first thing in the morning allows you the space to then have room for meetings, have room to deal with your emails. So it frees you up and it gives you a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, it's a good point that you're making, which is that I think is sometimes overlooked in sort of the onboarding and training of reps, is this sort of scaffolding that you give them to help them do their jobs. And, some of that's just the tools that they have, but actually going through and having a process and having content that's sort of ready where someone doesn't have to make all that up themselves. Then, instead of somebody spending time trying to figure all that stuff out, they show up, they have to learn how to use it, but it's mostly there. And then you spend the time, I think, probably on the more important things, which is like, how do you handle this conversation when it's going south? Or like, here's a, how do you handle this objection? Or like, how do you work to grow somebody into a bigger account, like more of that type of stuff, which is like the actual things that matter that we need people for versus the stuff that, if you're smart about process and systems thinking, which it sounds like you are over there, you can get to the more important stuff more quickly.
Right. Exactly. Because it basically gives them a framework to work with. And then this is where, and here's the thing though, I don't try to impose it on them either. Right. I'll give you the framework. Like, so for example, it's the same concept as if, you get your driver's license and you understand the basic components of how to drive, right? But you can choose what kind of driver you're going to be. So that's also part of it. I'll give you the framework based on what evidence has shown that's worked. But then this is something that I learned over the years of managing people. Like, obviously everybody is not cookie cutter. You have to tailor things based on personality. So maybe some folks might not want to take every single facet of what you are teaching them in terms of the framework to make it their own. Maybe they might want to take certain pockets of it, as long as it's still providing the desired result, right? But now they made that process a little bit of their own. They put their own flavor on it. That and allowing them that flexibility, that level of autonomy, right? It's a really great thing, because now they're satisfied with their work, right? They don't feel like they're just kind of this drone doing things because someone else has mandated that they do them.
Yeah, we try to adopt a similar philosophy, here and also in the software that we're building, of like Copilot more so than autopilot.
Right.
Where I think most people don't want to live in a pure autopilot world. Eventually you could sort of see a path to where, maybe you're not needed anymore, type of thing. So it sounds like you've struck that balance well. And we could probably keep talking about this forever, but I've got so many more questions about this, but we're running out of time here. So Will, if people want to learn more about Law 360 or be in touch, what's the best way to do that?
Well, you would just simply go to law360.com. We have a whole host of information there. I mean, it's pretty much the beautiful thing about law360.com is that it's what you see is what you get right immediately on the site. So you're going to be able to get access to looking at news content right away. You'll just see it. You'll see it there. And then if there's anything that interests you and you want to kind of start off with a subscription, you can also reach out. There are mechanisms there on the site that you can use to reach out.
Okay, great. And then, if somebody wanted to follow up with you to learn more about LinkedIn, is that the best way to get in touch? Or
yeah, absolutely. You can reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, William Anderson, on LinkedIn, and I know it's a pretty common name, but you'll be able to find me. Just look at Law 360; it'll pop up. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Great. Well, Will, thanks so much for being on the show, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Right.